I'm here, thanks, Chair.
Costello, Performing Arts Center.
I'm here, thanks, Chair.
Okay, hold on. Let's do this one at a time. I heard somebody from the Performing Arts Center. Is that Cody?
Yes, this is Cody Costello from the Performing Arts Center.
Okay. And was that Ms. Baldwin Day as well?
Yes, Chair, I'm here too.
Thanks. And that's Mr. Myers as well.
Yes, Chair, thanks.
All right. And we're not yet doing introductions. We'll get to that in just a minute. But is there anyone else on the phone that we know of? Oh, okay, that's it. Okay. It's a little bit tricky to park today because AFN is occurring. We had intended to keep this time and space open for no meetings today and tomorrow, but life happens. And so we needed this work session before the meeting on Tuesday. So I'm going to go ahead and call to order this work session. We're here to discuss AR 2025-308 and the associated memorandum 759-2025. It's a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly authorizing the use of ML&P sale proceeds to retire ACPA roof bond and CAM tax system municipal debt pursuant to municipal charter section 13.11 part A, and a memorandum from the mayor of the municipality of Anchorage seeking assembly approval to amend the management agreement between the municipality of Anchorage and the Alaska Center for Performing Arts by extending the contract term to June 30, 2027, increasing the management fee by $1,089,000 to $2,687,000, $687,502.74 in 2026, and reducing the management fee to $1,343,751.37 in 2027. We'll start with introductions in the room. We have
Jared Kirker,
myself, Christopher Constant on the phone. We have Mr. Myers. You there? Ms. Baldwin Day.
I'm here.
All right, thank you, Mr. Myers. I think you might be muted. We're also joined by Cody Costello, the director of the Performing Arts Center, and Mr. Bill Falls, the chief administration officer of the municipality. So, Mr. Falls, you want to take the lead?
Thank you, Chair Constant. I'm also here today with Renee Stewart, who leads our offices of venues, which has all of our municipal contracted facilities, of which the Performing Arts Center is one. And so, as you said, we are here today to talk about two items that have already been put before the Assembly on the agenda. The first is Memorandum 759-2025, which would increase the management fee and extend the management contract with the Performing Arts Center by 18 months, and then increase it by about $1 million annually. And a related item, AR 2025-308, which goes to how we would partly pay for that increase. And my goal today is to sort of situate this in the larger context and give you a kind of administrative take on how we landed here. And so I'm going to begin at the beginning and take you all the way back to 1987 and remind us that the Performing Arts Center has been managed by a sort of purpose-built nonprofit that was incorporated March 25th, 1987, before the PAC was even finished and before it had opened. At the time, it was incorporated for the purpose of operating, maintaining, and promoting the Performing Arts Center. This is the very first contract that we had with the Performing Arts Center back in June of 1987. The Assembly has always been involved in improving these contracts. And that framework has largely carried forward even through today. So the agreement that we are extending now, or proposing to extend now, was executed in 2015 and otherwise would expire at the end of the year. And so you see the same refrain that we have had since the beginning, that we are hiring the Alaska Center for the Performing Arts, Inc. for marketing, repair and maintenance, operation and management of the concessions and the commercial premises of the PAC. We earlier had a presentation from the PAC at a work session where they were describing the capital needs of the building and also some of the operational challenges. And they showed you this graph, and I wanted to give you sort of an administrative take on this graph. The management fee that the municipality has paid has historically been one component of the overall annual operating budget of the PAC. And so this was showed to you before, and by way of reminder, our management fee is the red line, and the blue line is the actual operating budget. And so one way of looking at this graph is to say, well, how did it all work? How did the PAC not go bankrupt? And the idea, of course, was that beyond the management fee, the way you get from the management fee the municipality is offering to the actual expenditures annually. Then you fill that gap with the revenue that the facility can generate. And we were actually just doing a deep dive on the finances over time. And it looks like at the very beginning, the Muni was paying about 60% of the overall operating expenses of the PAC. That decreased over time to about 50% by somewhere around 2005. And it's been less than 50% since then. And that seems to have been the operating understanding from the beginning. So I think Mr. Pargetter was one of the first heads of the nonprofit. And when asked by Fred Dyson all the way back in 1987, how's this all supposed to work? He says, well, we're hoping within 4 years, the operating costs will be supported by revenues and about half of it will come from the Muni. So a couple things to notice about this arrangement. This was the sort of operating prevailing paradigm for a number of years, but there is a big change that happens in 2023 and that ends up being relevant to our conversations. And that's where you see the blue line, the overall operating budget of the PAC, spiking up pretty dramatically because they made a big play and they brought Broadway, Alaska to town. The other thing I'm going to mention is that there's been discussion about the management fee and inflation adjustments. And you'll see that the red line does go up starting in about 2010. And I can tell you, we were researching this too. The management fee has been adjusted for inflation since 2009, with two exceptions. One, it looks like we sort of missed a year in 2010 and 2011, but we made it up in 2012. And then there is a cap. There was a 5% inflation cap, and 1 year inflation was 8%. But otherwise, we've been inflation adjusting the management fee. And as we approach these negotiations and this whole arrangement, we sort of had our Muni budget hats on. And typically in the Muni budget process, we often ask, what was your last functioning baseline? And why can't I just do that? And so we sort of looked at it from that arrangement, and it landed here, where the management fee that we paid in 2025 is just under 1.6 million. The proposal we have for you now is to add annually $1 million to take it to a new 2.7 million for calendar year 26 and for half of calendar year 27, where that last amount would be prorated. And why is that jump before you? So as I said, we sort of looked at what is the last functioning baseline, and here is where we went. We had to go for before COVID to sort of get our arms around this, right? So because we're in such a close symbiotic relationship, we get all of the audited financials from the PAC. So I'll take you back in time to 2018 and 2019, and there you'll see that the PAC made a little bit of money, not a whole lot, $56,000 in 2018, $225,000 in 2019. And you can see the overall operating revenues that they bring in before the municipal contract, and then the municipal contract gets you to the overall operating expenses. So the system was working with a giant asterisk. Working with a giant asterisk meaning it's pretty anemic. It's not like squirreling away lots of money for future capital needs. And it's pretty much at the margin. It's sort of at the knife's edge, right? One thing I'm going to draw your attention to is that the total operating expenses in 2019 were $2.9 million. And I'm going to put a marker on that because I'm going to mention it again in a second. Then I want to let you know that under the current 2015 arrangement, which we would be extending with this contract proposal, and I think probably for all time, there is a reserve account that is attached to the building for capital needs. And the way that reserve account is set up, it is for replacing equipment, for repairs, and for renovations and improvements. And it's funded in two ways. One is the performing arts nonprofit, which for many years in the main only booked performances by the symphony, by the orchestra, by the concert associations, etc., collects rents from those presenting entities, and 10% of the gross total rentals go into that reserve. The other way that reserve is capitalized is at the end of the year, any amount of money that is left over goes into the reserve account. So when we said 2018, 2019 was 56,000, 224,000, that would have flowed over into the reserve account. And that's one of the reasons why it was working with an asterisk is flagged, because really the reserve account is inadequate to meet the capital challenges of the building now. But on an operating basis, year by year, we're making it go. COVID was a big shock to the system, of course, everybody knows. everything shuttered. As a nonprofit that we push, and as a municipality, we pushed a lot of COVID relief funds to the PAC. So the organization weathered that storm without a lot of incident. But there is a big change. And we saw on the previous graph, and you'll see on this graph too, that the total expenses and the total revenues of the PAC nonprofit changed really dramatically 2023 and 2024. And I think this is a story that is fairly well known in the community now, but the pivot was that as the PAC, as I understand it, was looking at Broadway Alaska being Broadway performances brought up by the Concert Association being more challenging, there was a pivot to say, well, maybe what we can do is go bigger and we'll bring Broadway Alaska here and that will change the operating picture. It was a much more expensive proposition and it changed the overall complexion of the facility and their operations. But what happens? So then as we go into these negotiations, we're trying to figure out what is an appropriate amount of money to push forward through this contract extension. And we now have a confounding factor, which is that the Broadway Alaska pivot did not itself generate money. And so we're trying to figure out what do we do to keep the facility in operations without sort of cross-subsidizing Broadway Alaska. Helpfully, the way the PAC reports its audited financials is that they distinguish between Broadway operating revenues and expenses and non-Broadway operating revenue and expenses. And for present purposes, I think that it is important to highlight that when you scrape off the Broadway Alaska edition, you end up with what they're reporting as an annual structural operating loss of around $550,000, $600,000. And I mentioned earlier that I wanted to put a pin in the overall operating expenditures budget from 2019, and I'll compare that to 2024. So when you scrape off the Broadway Alaska impacts, the current non-Broadway budget is pretty close to what you would expect just adjusting the old 2019 budget for inflation. So simple way of doing it, we just throw it in a CPI calculator. That 2.9 today is pretty close to 3.6. They're at 3.8 in this audit. As we understand it, a big part of that difference is security costs and then market adjustments to salaries when they came back from COVID and found out that they were really behind a lot of their competitors. So after lots of conversation, we end up sort of understanding the arrangement as follows. If we're going to add $1 million for the next year and half of that, $500,000 for the 6 months of 2027, where does that go? For now, the first chunk, the $580,000, will just go to eliminate the non-Broadway operating loss. There's another $150,000, which the PAC has said they're going to push towards general repairs of aging systems and to addressing vandalism issues. Our read on that is that that relates to the capital needs, which are real, and to the extent that there is any scenario in which that is overfunded, it would, of course, spill over into the reserve under the provision I showed you on Section 6. There's about $100,000, which is just CPI increases to compensation. And if you look at their total payroll size, that's a little less than 4%, which feels reasonable to us. $100,000 for utility and security increases. That's on a baseline of $400,000 of utilities. And of course, I missed the note there. The security costs have been real, and those are worth investing in. They had some labor increases that we don't have perfect visibility into, but don't seem out of the norm. And then other non-discretionary cost increases, which they estimated at $104,000. That's something like 12% of the non-payroll budget. And of course, they are experiencing some additional challenges. So that would set us up where the facility stays open and in operation for the next 18 months while we sort of figure out what the long-term future for the PAC looks like. And I will say, and I probably should have said at the very beginning, that as we looked into what happened after the end of the year, our operating paradigm is we don't want the PAC to go dark, right? The PAC is a wonderful facility. We are blessed in this community to punch a little bit above our weight because of so many of the Project Anchorage gifts that we were given. The PAC is certainly one of them. And the spillover economic effects beyond just sort of the cultural effects are also very real, and we certainly didn't want to lose them. So if we're comfortable with about $1 million for 2026 and half of that for 2027, how would we actually pay for it?
One sec, Bill, and just note for the record that Ms. Barley joined us at 11:30. Go ahead.
That starts to take us into the next two item. Well, the next item. First, the municipality has had a ticket surcharge on all adult admissions to the PAC since pretty much the very beginning, since 1989. We have adjusted that a few times. In 2024 went up $1.50, and then on April 10th, 2010, we got all the way to $3. So we currently have a $3 surcharge. And that was initially used to pay off the debt from original facility construction because the building was mostly funded by a state grant, but there was more construction costs that we had to match. And then we replaced the roof. And so right now it is still paying off a 2005 roof bond. Here is the total amount of money that we have collected from that $3 surcharge. And I'll say it varies a lot. In the last 3 years, it has swung from post-COVID lows, well, in the 2021 era, almost nothing. 2022, we're at 143,000. 2023, we're at 263,000. 2024, we have a very robust return, over $500,000, but 2025, we're expecting it would be a lot less, probably in the 300-ish range. So the first pitch is to say, if we are going to add an additional $1 million to the contract, we would like to also bring the assembly an ordinance, which would allow us to keep the $3 surcharge, but not to program it to paying off a roof bond, but rather to support the contract costs. And that is an item that we will have to bring to you. Then the second piece of this three-part puzzle is that we have also introduced this resolution, which would allow us to use some leftover, some ongoing ML&P proceeds to pay off the Alaska Center of Performing Arts roof bond from 2005, which will then free up that $3 surcharge reprogramming that we were just discussing. And so we have tried to be very clear about that this is all part of an overall package of which you have two of probably the four pieces now. You have the management agreement, you have the debt relief. We would have to come back to you with an ordinance to change the $3 surcharge use. And then ultimately, we'll have to come to you with how the tourism-related bed taxes are programmed. We're estimating that if we're in the $300,000 range of revenues raised by a $3 surcharge now, that does mean we're looking at $750,000 of tourism-related bed taxes that have to fill the gap. Again, while we continue to figure out what a sustainable PAC looks like after 18 months from now. The advantage of this arrangement, or really the only way that we were able to piece it together on our side of the ledger, is that in a world where the Assembly knows we have just introduced a budget where among the many tens of millions of dollars of department requests, we granted effectively zero. We're proposing a way to accommodate this additional management fee increase for the PAC without general government tax dollars, which is not to say it is costless. I mean, certainly there's an opportunity cost to using tourism-related bed taxes for other purposes, and there's certainly an opportunity cost for using the ongoing ML&P proceeds to pay off the debt. But we do think it hangs together in a way which should keep the PAC open and in operation, and ultimately be better for the community in the next 18 months. And I think that is how I know to set the table, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I would note that Mr. Volin just joined us. It's 11:34. Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll go back and watch the bit that I missed. And I appreciate the briefing that we had yesterday, just to get some background. I guess my question is on the operating side. So we know, for example, the Denina, some other facilities, the port, are completely user fee funded, right? And that's not the way the PAC is set up. Can you give a little historical information on kind of what, knowing it's a muni facility, it's been operated by this nonprofit entity, what historically has been kind of the share of essentially operating subsidy, and how has that changed over time?
Yes, and so I think you may have missed the early slide where I was trying to give that historical context. I don't have the numbers on the board, but you can generally get the shape, and I'll give the numbers to you again. The difference between the red line, which is the municipal management fee, and the blue line, which is the actual amount of operating expenditures that the PAC had, is the gap that had to get made up in tickets, rentals, fees, and philanthropic donations. And when we started this whole arrangement in 1987, we were funding about 60% of the operations. That declined to about 50% by about 2005. It is less than 50% now. both because there was an ongoing decline and because the total expenditures increased dramatically when Broadway Alaska came in, and there was not a management fee that was proposed to support the Broadway Alaska move.
Okay, thanks. So just, and I apologize for making you go back. So the spike then is really, it looks like the change was the Broadway Alaska piece as opposed to the baseline operating. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so I have a few questions. First, have you calculated the cost savings related to debt service for the payoff?
Yes, if you look at the assembly memorandum. No, that is a good question. So there is not a savings for paying off the roof bond early. As I understand it, we're basically defeasing that roof bond at cost. We're just clearing it off the books in the same amount, with the same amount of cost that we otherwise would have incurred if we had waited until it fully matured in 2033 or thereabouts.
So we're not
So-
saving anything on
So we don't
interest?
I will confirm that with public finance, but I do not believe that is the case. I think there really is an opportunity cost where rather than taking that amount of revenue and so I don't think there's a savings on retiring the debt early. I think there's a little bit of an opportunity cost by using ongoing ML&P proceeds that would otherwise be deposited into the trust.
I don't know how that could be. I mean, we're paying compounding interest on the debt service that we've accrued or the debt that we've accrued. So it feels like there should be something there. Did we really, whenever this happens, sign such a bad deal that we get to pay every penny of the interest, even
Well,
if we pay it off early?
Let me take that away and I will ask public finance to give you actual chapter and verse, and hopefully you are right and I am wrong.
Thank you, because it would be nice to identify if there was an actual savings. So your proposal is to take $750,000 of the bed tax to make up some difference here. And you're anticipating then that that's an annual amount?
For the next 18 months, I think we aren't trying to arrange ourselves in a permanent arrangement that we think is the next 25 years just yet. I mean, I think we are trying to get us a little bit of time to continue the conversation for the next 18 months and then see what the longer term future looks like.
I think
And
that's
our
really
operating
important.
paradigm would be that we would first fill the additional management fee cost with the revenues generated by the $3 surcharge, and then use bed taxes only to the extent necessary to fill the gap.
Right, so a performing arts center organization would need less of those dollars because they would have revenues off the ticket sales and the fees.
I think they could. I mean, those are conversations we have not fully had with the PAC yet. And certainly I know the Broadway conversations are challenging nationwide right now. On the other hand, I know they're working on generating additional revenues through alcohol sales and also looking at how to retool the Broadway Alaska program so that it could be a revenue generator. I don't know what they have to report on that front yet.
Well,
That
but I
would be
mean,
the question.
any
we'd have to ask
additional
them.
ticket sold is $3 or whatever, which is a reduction maybe in the need if the balance is there. So this is 2026 money you're talking about, the 750?
Yes.
And so I'm not gonna kind of go backwards on what we just took care of, which was providing you guidance on negotiating the terms for the tourism marketing project or tourism promotion, as the charter puts it. But I do want to say that there are a lot of needs in that category. And so I want everyone to understand that, at least from where we are today as this is moving forward, this is not a $750,000 committed annual contribution of tourism marketing funds or promotion funds, because there are so many needs. Lastly,
And on that front, I said that this was two pieces of a 4-part puzzle, and I'm not sure I ever said what the fourth puzzle piece was, but you're right. It is these two pieces plus an ordinance to change the $3 surcharges allowable uses, which is set in code, and then that final piece is a programming of all of the promotion of the tourism industry bed taxes, which usually comes in the form of a contract with Visit Anchorage for tourism promotion. And so if there is less than the full 4%, 1/3 of the bed taxes going to Visit Anchorage, it'll have to show up at least there.
right, I mean, that's the gist, that's where that
Yeah.
money would come from. And so what is your take on what happens in 18 months?
Well, we certainly would begin negotiations for the next management contract early next year. and I know that the PAC is in a bit of a transition space itself. And so I think for now, I can only offer you the process point, which is that I think we would like to engage in the interrogation of what is the sustainable long-term future. That I mentioned that we sort of crash into this with our muni budget hats on. And the usual dance that we have in administration in budget season is the department will come to us and say, I need more money. We will say, why is that? Well, we didn't work last year. Then we get convinced that something has changed that we actually need to respond to. And then the next conversation before saying, okay, we need to pour money in is how do you solve this problem without more money? And so I suspect that part of the next 18 months is having real in-depth conversations with the PAC about whether something structurally has changed, where this must be the prevailing way we operate for the next 40 years, or if you can solve this problem without just more money.
Well, these will be conversations for people, not myself. I will say, just in closing, and I'd be happy to talk about this when we get to the items on the agenda, that I was really not pleased to read the big campaign that was initiated by leadership of the PAC to make what looked like a very one-sided argument in the community about how the municipality has, quote, failed to take care of this building. And now here we are with the empty bag being asked to fill it. And I do appreciate the work of the administration putting together a proposal that is generally reasonable with a few questions still to be answered. But I think in a collaborative effort, when we are all trying to work together to solve problems we all share, it's probably best not to go pointing fingers at the people who you're coming to asking for help. If there are other members who'd like to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just note, well, what I made, appreciate the briefing and, yeah, like I have said before, I think I share the goal of finding a way forward with the PAC, and what that needs to look like. And it is one of multiple facilities that we have, to deal with, especially the legacy of Project 80s. But I'll also say, I do think, and I appreciate the point that it's not, the muni choosing to neglect this or anything like that. But I think it is true that we, as a full community, can take responsibility for the fact that this can has been kicked down the road for a long time. And again, not just this facility, but the Sullivan Arena, there's many others. And so I think for Project 80s overall, and really some big kind of how we pay for stuff questions, I think it is fair to say that that we all have to answer a question that maybe we wished had been answered 20 years ago and wasn't. So anyway, just adding that as well. Thanks.
And on that point, I will say, remember, this is the operating side of the ledger. The capital side of the ledger is also an ongoing and unfinished conversation. And you will see, if you have not already seen, in our proposal for bond packages this coming year, that there's a first bond proposal that would benefit the PAC, which is to replace its fire alarm system, in part because, as we have been in conversations, it seems like if that is the thing that goes down, that is the thing that immediately shuts the building. So we're going to try to put together a bond schedule or proposal, or framework, so that we can begin to knock out some of these deferred maintenance issues.
And just so it's on this record, there's been some discussion, and I know it's kind of out a little bit further in time, but figuring out a way, once the Denina Center is fully capitalized, to redo that section of the charter that would allow the Performing Arts Center to come under the umbrella of the management process that funds very successfully the ongoing operations of Denina and Egan and others.
And on that front, I'll also say, even ahead of a world where we can reprogram funds that are attached to the Egan or the Denina, in part because this solution really does require Visit Anchorage, willingly or unwillingly, helping to contribute to the solution. We've brought them into the conversation, and to their credit, I think the PAC has welcomed them into that conversation. And I do think everyone is seeing that there are untapped synergies by having a closer marriage and relationship between Visit Anchorage, which also manages the convention centers, and the PAC. And so, just by way of example, we were speaking with Steve Rader and Julie Sapi, who mentioned that sometimes they have challenges operating big conventions at the Denina or the Egan because of the time it takes to set up and tear down various rooms. And if you could do the keynote speech in the Atwood, that actually could make a real benefit for them. And so those are things that we are also hoping to explore in the next 18 months.
Some more day use of that building. Sounds like a great idea, Mr. Vaughn.
Okay, shoot me down if I'm way off on this, but I guess when we talk about Visit Anchorage and the Performing Arts Center being part of Visit Anchorage's work, Visit Anchorage currently has the contract for promotion of tourism, that bucket under the room tax, but they might not necessarily have that forever. So when we talk about Visit Anchorage, are we really saying part of whoever has the contract in the future?
Yeah, so I should be a little bit more precise. Currently, right now, Visit Anchorage has two contracts with the Muni. One is for operating the the Egan and the Denina, which is subcontracted out to ASM Global. Then there is this other contract, which is what we normally talk about, which is for the promotion of tourism. Currently, our 12% bed tax, as you know, is 1/3, 4%, dedicated to the promotion of the tourism industry. Since the beginning of time, we have pushed all of that money to Visit Anchorage to promote tourism. You are right. We could switch vendors. There could be another person that is promoting tourism. Or, as you will see as part of this overall package, we could say traditional promotion of tourism activities, we would like to fund at less than the full 4%. And we would like to promote the tourism industry in a different way using some of those funds. And so the sum of those funds would be the approximately $750,000 we're talking here, in part because the PAC, really no kidding, does drive a lot of tourism to town. And in a world where we're choosing between supercharging traditional advertising and website placement versus keeping the PAC in operation, we choose keep the PAC in operation.
I follow up. So then the other bucket, the sort of administration, I don't know if that's the right word, of the convention centers, Visit Anchorage doing that now. Is that, how long is their contract for that? I guess I'm just trying to, when we have this conversation, acknowledge that the vendor is subject to change for both of those
Yes.
buckets.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
To that question, the Visit Anchorage's contract to manage the Egan and the Sullivan comes out of the 4%, which is dedicated to the convention centers, the third that's dedicated to convention centers. That contract had one last option year on it this year. So we extended for 26, and then it needs to be renegotiated next year. I'll say the lived experience of all this is that virtually all of Renee's obligations had significant negotiations this year, and in the future, hopefully my gift for the future, Renee, will be that we will put them on different timelines.
All right. Thank you.
Ms. Baldwin-Day.
Thanks, Chair. So I wanted to point out that since we have brought up the Denina Center, that we definitely learned some lessons from the PAC with respect to making sure that we had funds, capital funds available. But with respect to operating costs, I'm curious if we have any data about how this particular operating arrangement compares to similarly sized and similarly situated performing arts centers elsewhere in the country. Is this, I guess, percentage-wise, is what we are scaling to appropriate? And do we have any data on that?
Through the chair to Member Baldwin-Day, I do not, but I have heard Cody Costello and some of the board members make those comparisons. She may have some at her fingertips.
Ms. Costello.
Hi, was I called on? I'm sorry.
Yeah, there was a question by Ms. Baldwin-Day. Ms. Baldwin-Day, you want to ask it again?
Sure. Am I? Oh, I am still off mute. Okay. Yeah, Ms. Costello, I was curious if you had any data that reflected how this new proposed operating agreement compares to agreements with such similarly sized or similarly situated performing arts centers elsewhere in the country.
Yes, we could provide some examples outside of this meeting to the body. Here.
I would really appreciate seeing those. Thanks.
No problem.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, anything else? Mr. Halsey? So we have a suite of items coming before us on Tuesday. Tuesday's agenda is quite packed. I don't think any of these are in the category that people are discussing postponing, but we'll know more about that tomorrow. And by Tuesday, we should have this conversation and be prepared. So if there's nobody else, we'll go ahead and adjourn, prepare for our next work session.